Good morning, everyone. My name is Detective Sarah Mack, and we are going to go through a cold case. So weaning is probably the most critical time point, or at least one of them, in a calf's life that actually dictates how much they are going to be producing later on when they start lactating. Now, for decades, we've actually been weaning these calves based off of weight and age, but this doesn't give us an indication of what's actually happening in the rumen and if the rumen is ready for that transition. However, we do know that rumination is directly linked to rumen development. Now, previous detectives have been able to look at and monitor that rumination. However, with that, it is very subjective and quite limited. Thanks to new technology, we now have the ability to have an objective and reliable way of monitoring that rumination, which we then use to basically assess whether or not this current weaning method is the most appropriate for our calves. Now, to look at this new evidence, we enrolled 49 calves into the study, fitted them with an accelerometer-based ear tag that monitored hour-by-hour rumination. These calves were kept in individual hutches with ad libitum access to a TMR ration that was weighed daily so that we could get the feed intake. They were then weaned at 56 days, and we followed them for another 7 days. So our time period that we're going to be looking at today is the 7 days before weaning, known as our pre-weaning time period. We then are going to look at the 7 days after weaning, which is known as our post-weaning time period. We're going to look at some graphs here. Our y-axis is going to be rumination in minutes per day. Our blue line is our pre-weaning time period. Our orange line is our post-weaning time period. They are then categorized into 3 different categories. We've got those calves that increased in rumination after weaning, our average calves, and then those that decreased in rumination after weaning. We are going to define successive weaning as those that increased rumination following weaning. Something interesting is that we had 18 calves that decreased in rumination, and then we had 31 calves that increased in rumination time after weaning. For those that decreased, we can see that their pre-weaning rumination time is actually about 30 minutes per day more than the average calf. Then we see those that increased were actually on the lower end of our average calves with 315 minutes per day around this time period. So that's quite strange. So then we decided to look at, okay, how much are these calves actually eating? And again, we have our blue being our pre-weaning, orange being our post-weaning, feed consumption kilograms per day on the y-axis. Very similar situation. Those that decreased the rumination time were eating more than the average calf. Those that increased rumination time were eating less than the average calf, which is kind of counterintuitive because research will tell us dry feed equals rumen development equals successive weaning. So this is quite strange. And because of that, we can see that there's not a direct link to feed intake versus our rumination time. So because of that, there might be some underlying factors, maybe looking at genetics. And because we have over a third of our calves that are being unsuccessful during this weaning transition, now the question is, do we continue on this path of weaning them just based off of weight and age, or do we look at a new path, maybe looking more into how rumination is looking and that development aspect of the rumen? Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Nope.
And just out of interest, did you also look at sort of weight? Was there any? Did you look at weight gain? So is there anything correlate, say, more rumination with better weight gains or not?
So we are in the process of looking at the weight data. I can tell you that there is a correlation between feed intake and birth weight. So there's a positive correlation, meaning that the heavier calves that have that are born heavier are actually eating more. So potentially that might be a factor. And again, kind of looking at genetics, and then obviously we have the factor of sex as well on that.
Any other question, Jane?
So when you were looking at these calves, was they individual calf
Yes.
reared, and then as
Yes.
they're weaned, were they like moved to a group?
No. So we followed them during the full study. They were kept in an individual pen. This is farm protocol. After they found that there was some issues with health and eating after, so trying to take off milk and move them at the same time. So they keep them with no milk for 7 days and then move them to a group pen.
So the measurements were still as individuals?
Yes,
all
yes.
the way through. Okay.
Yep. And so with the milk consumption, they actually incrementally increase and decrease around time of weaning. So they start at 4 liters, incrementally increase to 8 liters, and then incrementally decrease. So at this last week, they were at 3 liters in the morning and no milk allowance in the evening.
That water all the time?
Water all the time, yes. And ad libitum access to dry feed. Yep.
Any last question? One more?
It'd be a question to ask: is the feed that was available to them from day one? Did you measured the intake from day one?
Correct.
And was the correlation with those that did a better performance after weaning than before weaning? Did that correlate with their intake from early age through?
That's a really good question. That's something that I can definitely look into, because I do have that data, but I actually don't know at this time.
And
that's
then,
a good thing, though.
And then you're using the same feed on a further study with different feeds that are available, and whether one ration as opposed to another formulation may work better than what was particularly there.
That's interesting that you mentioned that, because this particular farm actually had 2 different rations. One was for the bulls, which had a higher grain content, and then one for their heifers that was more balanced between the fibrous material and the grain. And they did transition to fully being on that heifer ration, because they were seeing that the bulls were having some issues around time of weaning. So that definitely was something that they looked at.
Perfect.
But yeah.
We'll wrap it there because of time. Thank
Perfect.
you very much.
Thank you.